Mickey asked over on Twitter, how does one determine if a study's findings are statistically significant? Mickey, I have to say that that's one of the most common questions I'm asked when working with folks on evidence-informed school improvement. So I'm happy to answer it, and let's get into it today. Hi, friends. I'm Matthew Courtney, and I help schools help kids. And here we talk all about evidence-informed school improvement. So if you're into that, like, share, subscribe, or follow from wherever you're watching, and come be a part of our community of improvers. All right, so let's get into this. Let's talk a little bit about statistical significance within the realm of education research. Now, I could probably teach you a whole semester-long class on this topic. So what I'm going to do in this video is really boil it down to 4 steps. I think these are the 4 most key areas or principal concepts for you to master around statistical significance to really get you up on your feet and moving quickly in this area. So let's get into it. Tip number 1, to get started, the first thing we need to do is look at the study design and determine whether or not the researcher has performed some kind of null hypothesis testing. A null hypothesis test is a statistical test that assumes that there is no significant difference between the variables being tested in an experiment. Basically, in education research, what we do is we take 2 variables. So let's say minutes of recess and reading achievement. And we use statistical tests to compare them and look at the relationship or the difference between them. The null hypothesis says that there is no relationship between them. But if we do a statistical test and we find that there is a statistically significant relationship, then the researcher is going to say that we reject the null hypothesis and that we do think there is some kind of relationship or difference between them that is important for the work that we're doing. While there are literally whole books written about null hypothesis testing, there's really 2 statistical tests that are the most important for education practitioners as they begin to kind of read research and work with education research. The first one is called the t-test. And a t-test basically takes 2 distributions of scores and compares the means or the statistical average of those 2 distributions of scores. So this is what we do when we do like pre-test, post-test analysis or randomized control trial where we have a group who received an intervention and a group who didn't, and we're doing fancy math to compare them. We're usually using a t-test for that. Another kind of null hypothesis test that is very common in education is the ANOVA, and there's actually a whole family of tests under sort of the ANOVA umbrella, but it's the same kind of thing. And in ANOVA, we have more than 2 groups that we want to compare. So we have multiple distributions, and we're using the statistical test to compare all of those distributions within one another. It can get a little hairy, but what I recommend you do as a practitioner trying to consume research and use it to inform your professional practice is to read that method section of that research paper with a really careful eye. Maybe you have a statistics manual nearby that you can reference and really make sure that you understand the specific null hypothesis test that researcher has chose. A well-written paper is also going to tell you why the researcher chose that null hypothesis test and kind of what it means and how it works. Once you've determined that they're using a null hypothesis test, the next step is to flip ahead in the paper and check the p-value. When you're looking at the outcomes from a null hypothesis test, you're going to be looking at lots of different numbers on different tables and across different scales. But the value that is most important for an education practitioner looking to determine and interpret statistical significance in a study is the p-value. The p-value represents the probability that the results of your data analysis occurred by chance, and they're usually reported the way you see on the screen, with p being less than 0.05 being a pretty commonly accepted threshold for statistical significance, p being less than 0.01 being really strong significance, and less than 0.001 being extremely strong statistical significance. And so when we're looking at the results of this research, we really want to see that our p-value is below 0.05 before we determine the results of a null hypothesis test to be significant. Let's consider a common example in education. Let's say that we have 2 classes of students, and one is receiving a new teaching technique and the other is receiving teaching business as usual, the way the teachers have always done it. And at the end of the study, we want to compare the results to see which class did better. What we really want to know is, did the new teaching technique work better than the old teaching technique, and were the differences statistically significant? In null hypothesis testing, our underlying assumption is that at the end of the day, those 2 classes are not going to have statistically different scores, that everything is going to be business as usual. The scores are going to look the same as what we're used to seeing. So at the end of the year, we take those two distributions, we use a t-test. That's usually what we're going to use in pre-test, post-test, or two-group analysis. We're going to do our t-test, and we're going to see what our p-value is. And let's say that our p-value is 0.02. What that tells me is that there's only a 2% probability that the results of that analysis occurred by random chance, meaning that if they are different, then they are statistically significantly different because there's only a 2% chance that those two outcomes would be different. So what does that mean? That tells me that the intervention likely helped boost the achievement in one of my two classrooms, that the difference is statistically significant. Once you've considered the p-value, it's time to check the effect size. If the p-value tells you whether or not the two distributions of scores are different, the effect size tells you how different they are really by comparing the averages combined with the standard deviation. Effect size is calculated using a formula called Cohen's d, and we report it like you see on the screen. If Cohen's d is around 0.2 or below, we consider that to be a small effect size. If it's around d equals 0.5, that's considered a medium effect size. And if it's around d equals 0.8 or greater, we consider that to be a large effect size. The reporting of effect size has become really common in educational research, especially due to the work of John Hattie, who focuses on the use of meta-analysis. And he actually uses meta-analysis, where he combines results from multiple studies to create sort of a master effect size that is purported to help leaders understand kind of the impact of an intervention so they can gauge their results and their expectations a little bit better. If effect size is not reported, it's easily calculated. All you need to know are the average or the mean of both distributions of scores, how many kiddos are in each distribution, and the standard deviation of each distribution. It's easily calculated, but even better, you can plug it into an online calculator and it'll do all of the work for you. I have an online calculator that you can use. You can access it at www.matthewbcourtney.com/repository. And this tool allows you to upload a spreadsheet and spit out an effect size almost instantly. I highly recommend that you check it out. Finally, if you're just still feeling really lost in all of the statistical language in a research study, read the discussion section. A highly skilled researcher is going to take time in the discussion section of their paper to explain what the results mean and why the results matter. So if you're really struggling and you're feeling bogged down and kind of underwater as you try to process all of the numbers and what they mean for you as a practitioner, trust that that researcher has taken the time to explain it in a way that is meaningful and valuable to you. So go to that discussion section, see what they have to say about it, and trust their interpretation. These papers have gone through peer review. They've been rigorously edited over a period of months and sometimes years. And they're really set up to help you be successful as you start to apply research findings in your professional practice. Mickey, thanks for your question. I hope you found this video to be helpful as you continue on your path toward being a more evidence-empowered educator. And if you have a question that you'd like to see in a future video, drop it down below and I'll add it to the queue. And if you want even more help starting your evidence-informed school improvement journey, check out my Evidence-Empowered Educator Coaching Program at www.matthewbcourtney.com/coaching. See you next time.